Hello, friends of the channel. Right now it says I have nobody in. That's fine. Like I've said in every stream up till now, I might be talking to myself for quite some time. Today, I'm going to cover a lot of the things that I talked about yesterday in a video that I released. There will be a little bit of replay, but it's important enough that I want to go over it a second time. Hi guys, I see that there's some people coming into the stream. We're going to go over DVEs, domestic violent extremists, and the Biden policy, how it's switching, the fusion centers that are already all across the country, and how I think this will play out when it comes to censorship and then moving beyond that for patriots. So what's up, guys? There's a few people in here. Hey guys, how's it going? So the first thing I want to play is, yesterday I came out with a video and it was about this press release right here. And this is Biden's press secretary, if you didn't know that yet. And she's making a speech about basically the response to the Capitol Hill incident and what rights and freedoms we're going to lose in order for them to make sure this never happens again. All right, and so I want to play this. It's 1 minute and 42 seconds. I'm going to play it in full and just listen for some key words in here.
I also have some news to share on the president's response to domestic violent extremism, the January 6th assault on the Capitol, and the tragic deaths and destruction that occurred underscored what we have long known. The rise of domestic violent extremism is a serious and growing national security threat. The Biden administration will confront this threat with the necessary resources and resolve. We are committed to developing policies and strategies based on facts, on objective and rigorous analysis, and on our respect for constitutionally protected free speech and political activities. Our initial work on DVE will broadly fall into 3 areas. The first is a tasking from President Biden sent to the ODNI today, requesting a comprehensive threat assessment coordinated with the FBI and DHS on domestic violent extremism. This assessment will draw on the analysis from across the government and, as appropriate, non-governmental organizations. The key point here is that we want fact-based analysis upon which we can shape policy. So this is really the first step in the process, and we will rely on our appropriate law enforcement and intelligence officials to provide that analysis. The second will be the building of an NSC capability to focus on countering domestic violent extremism. As a part of this, the NSC will undertake a policy review effort to determine how the government can share information better about this threat, support efforts to prevent radicalization, disrupt violent extremist networks, and more. There's important work already underway across the interagency in countering DVE, and we need to understand better its current extent and where there may be gaps to address so we can determine the best path forward.
So, the number one thing that struck me about that whole situation was that she's talking about they're going to partner with NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Now, who could that be? Well, it brought to my mind Palantir. And that's a company that we had gone over in a couple of videos of mine from months ago. And I think that's the direction that the censorship and worse is going to come from. And basically Palantir set up these fusion centers all across the country where they run what they call the machine, and it is able to aggregate data that's coming in from all kinds of different sources. And when it first came onto my radar was during the protests in Chicago back in May of, I think, of 2019. And during that, the chief of police made a press conference where he said that there were some Facebook posts that they found, and so they mobilized hundreds of police officers. And of course, my thought was, well, wait, who's watching Facebook posts live in the police station? And he answered that question.
Became aware of several social media posts encouraging looting downtown. Officers were dispatched to our downtown area once we got word of the social media post. 400 officers were dispatched to our downtown. As the officers arrived to our downtown.
So where did they come from?
Yep, well, all that human behavior checks out as perfectly normal to me. These aren't the only apps for this stuff. There are tons of them. I mean, just a cursory review shows us neighbors by Ring and Nextdoor, local neighborhood. So now that you've seen the civilian version, let's go over CPIC, the thing that the police commissioner mentioned in his talk. What have they done about data? How have they weaponized it against the people? And how are they rolling it out? At govtech.com, the Chicago Fusion Center gives police new criminal investigation tools. Chicago's new Crime Prevention Information Center, or CPIC, equips the city to prevent terrorist attacks and revolutionize investigations.
So what we're literally talking about there, with no exaggeration, hey Luna Tuna, what we're literally talking about there with no exaggeration is pre-crime. Yay, pre-crime. Now, another thing that I played yesterday that I want to play again tonight is Glenn Greenwald's response to the Biden administration's announcement about domestic violent extremists and how they're going to get together to get people. So listen to Glenn Greenwald, because this guy, man, left, right, doesn't matter. He proves it, that he's just a truth teller. But listen to what he's saying very carefully in the context of Palantir, these fusion centers that are already in all the major cities across the country, and just listen to what he's talking about. It's important. Hey, Giza.
Looking forward that the members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of the country and they gain
unbelievable insurgencies, guys.
Strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians.
And that's the thing that really annoys me about that whole clip right there. Even libertarians? Wow, even libertarians. That's kind of stretching it to me there, John O'Brennan. Sorry about not playing that for you guys, but we're going to move forward in this. And we're going to go to Glenn Greenwald. After hearing that, this is Glenn Greenwald's response.
Yeah. Short answer is yes. Purpose of this bill. Glenn Greenwald is the most independent of independent journalists. He writes on Substack, where we hope.
Yeah, Giza, that's the new counterculture, and it's the new terrorist right there. You don't want to be described that way in this new country.
Support him. He joins us tonight. Glenn, this is starting to make me a little bit nervous. Do the rest of us have cause to be concerned about this trend?
Absolutely. A lot of times if you warn of a danger, you have to piece things together in order to demonstrate that it's actually coming. In this case, you don't have to. They're explicitly saying precisely what they want to do. The thing that struck me so much about that John Brennan video is it would be one thing if they were saying, look, there's a band of people, 20 here, 50 over here, who wear swastika armbands, who still are in the KKK. There's maybe 2,000. We need to. That's not what they're saying. What he's saying is the exact opposite. Every group he lifted, even libertarians. It's essentially he's defining the insurgency as anyone who has an ideology other than neoliberalism. In other words, other than the ruling class view that is about to congeal and merge with the power of the state. And what they're talking about explicitly, Tucker, is using the tools that they use to take ISIS off the internet, the tools that they use to destroy Al-Qaeda. They're talking about it as a second war on terror. And that first war on terror, no matter what your views were originally at the beginning of 9/11, ended up eroding not civil liberties just elsewhere, but here at home as well. One that is born by name of being a domestic war on terror designed to essentially criminalize any oppositional ideology to the ruling class. There is literally nothing that could be more dangerous, and it's not fear-mongering or alarmism to say it. There are bills pending by Adam Schiff as well that would simply take the existing war on terror legislation always aimed at foreign governments and foreign actors and simply amend it to say we can now do that within the United States.
And whenever the Patriot Act came out and we were told that the 702 about queries and the FISA court and all this stuff was going to be strictly used on non-citizens and foreign actors, everybody at the time called BS, and it took many, many years for them to come out with it, but here we are. Now Adam Schiff is putting in legislation that will allow not just the monitoring and surveillance and storing of Americans' data, but they're going to be able to use these NSA and CIA tools, these digital tools of war against citizens now. And this was explicitly prohibited whenever these tools were created. But they're using, of course, the Capitol Hill incident, which they called in one of their own articles, the 9/11 of social media. They're going to use it to do that. The totalitarian two-step, as David Icke calls it.
Who's going to stand up in opposition to this? I don't see any of the corporate Republican caucus really even noticing. I see a lot of people I thought were liberal turn out to be not liberal at all, but more authoritarian. So how do we prevent this from happening? Any idea?
Well, one of the things I'm really hoping for is that we can finally get out of enough people believing that the way to understand Washington is Democrat versus Republican, and that you side with one team and believe they're on your side and defending your interest and the other team is your enemy. It is not true. There is a ruling class elite that is extremely comfortable with the establishment wings of both parties. They love Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer every bit as much as they love Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney and Marco Rubio and Paul Ryan. Those are the people who they fund equally because those are the people who serve their agenda. Then there's a whole other huge group of people at whose expense they rule, and some of them consider themselves on the left and some consider themselves on the right, and it's time to break down those barriers. I was super enthused to see a group of 8 left-wing politicians, including Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and others, say, we will not allow a new war on terror because we know how dangerous it can be. Let them stand with right-wing members to break down this artificial, false, fraudulent prism that the way to understand Washington is thinking that one of the two parties is on your side. Neither of them is.
I just think a lot of people are going to be saving that permanently, what you just said, on their DVRs. And I certainly hope they do, because you're right. Glenn Greenwald, thank you very much.
So, of course, he's right. He's right quite often. But the question is what to do about it. I'm glad that Rashida Tlaib and the others, howdy, Paul, and the others are standing up against, they're not allowing a second war on terrorism. But at this point of watching Glenn Greenwald, this is where I had the thought about the third and fourth party. And if you didn't watch my video, cool, 17 people watching. And if you didn't watch my video last night, what I was thinking about was the third party, right? The third party on the left, the third party candidate, the Green candidate, or the third party on the right, the Ross Perot or whoever. They always ran at different times. And so whichever left or right side had that third party candidate, they were always wary of voting for them because they were afraid that they were going to cede power to the other side by voting for the third party. And what I was saying by we need a third and a fourth is that if we had a fourth party as well, so you have the progressive left, you have the neoliberals, then you have the neoconservatives, and then you have, like, I don't know, the MAGA conservatives on the right. Now you have 4 parties, right? And now people who normally would be scared to vote for a third party because they're afraid that's going to cede the power, the difference in the election to the other side, now both sides have a third party that is going to take some votes away from them, and I think that would make people a lot more comfortable voting for another party. So That just an idea I had. More than a third party. We need a third and a fourth party. And that, I think at that point, the number of people who would be like the Bernie Sanders supporters, the number of people who would be the Joe Biden supporters, the number of people who would be the Mitch McConnell supporters, and the number of people who would be Donald Trump supporters, I think would be fairly equal across the board. And you would have a pretty competitive election. And then from there, we could just hope to drain all the power out of the established neocons and neoliberals through that process. But it's just a thought I had. Anyways. So, how's this stuff going to get done? Well, I've gone over many times the different wiretap rooms that AT&T has with the NSA. And I was doing this before the Nashville incident happened, of course. Now, I'm not going to read these Intercept articles, but I will include them for you guys. And it shows basically how all these data fusion centers that AT&T runs for the NSA are scattered throughout the country, and they're gathering mass data, not just on foreign citizens. This one is the one at New York. It's called Titan Point. If you look at the building structure itself, it looks kind of similar to me to the building in Nashville. That was the AT&T building that had the incident happen there on Christmas. But let me read a part of this to you. The codename Titan Point features dozens of times in the NSA documents, often in classified reports about surveillance operations. The agency uses codenames to conceal information it deems especially sensitive. For instance, the names of companies it cooperates with or specific locations where electronic spying is carried out. Such details are usually considered exceptionally controlled information, a category beyond top secret and thus outside the scope of most of the documents that Snowden was able to obtain. Wow. Pretty secret. So beyond these NSA places that are set up inside the United States, Palantir was my first thought, because Palantir over the past 4 years has been putting in this infrastructure inside the United States to monitor United States citizens, and they call it pre-crime. And the system that Palantir has developed is essentially you have the government is mining all this data. So you have the government mining all this data. It's more data than they could ever know what to do with. And the artificial intelligence is not good enough yet to be able to sift through this data in any kind of reasonable way that would be able to help things in the future. Now, they have the data stored, so when somebody does something horrible, they can go and look up everything about that person afterwards. But what they're trying to do in the intelligence community is create AI good enough to where they can do that beforehand. And Palantir has been the company in the United States that's been pushing that agenda. They got a $167 million contract with the Army. It's ran by Peter Thiel, who is just another technocrat by a different name. This company, this blog, it's called brassballsblog.blog, but it is, and they source all their information because it is just a blog, but it's the most comprehensive coverage of Palantir's cyber surveillance system, and it's now in 80 cities. And it's a serious issue. It really is. Let me play a little bit of this for you.
All right, here's how we're going to work for tonight. Sergeant Flores will be out as 160.
Say you're living in Los Angeles and you just got out of prison. The LAPD could be keeping tabs on you through a program known as Operation Laser. It uses crime, arrest, and field data to determine where violent crimes are likely to take place and who will perpetrate them.
Laser predicts who will commit a crime before a crime actually happens.
Groups like the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition are sounding the alarm in local communities. They say predictive policing strategies like laser disproportionately target low-income people and communities of color. Why do you believe that this data is subjective?
The data is subjective, and the data is biased because policing practices have always impacted Black and brown and poor people. Now we have predictive policing just coming in with a veneer of science trying to tell us that that's somehow making policing more objective. But what we're finding is that it's only augmenting the way that policing operates.
Isn't that interesting? Aren't there so many things in our current reality that are doing that exact situation? It's interesting to me. How a deviant philosopher built Palantir, a CIA-funded data mining juggernaut. Hey, Erica. So, right here, we're on In-Q-Tel's webpage. Right here, you can see Palantir, totally funded by In-Q-Tel. We know who In-Q-Tel is, or you wouldn't be on my channel. Now, this is another document that I'll put in the description once we get done with this. It's called Stuck in a Pattern, Early Evidence of Predictive Policing and Civil Rights. It was written in 2016, and it just absolutely thrashes this idea of using these research centers or fusion centers to basically collect a bunch of data and then use the Palantir algorithms to go through it and make predictions about who is the bad guy and what are they going to do. Now, the thing about that is that it's completely dependent on the algorithm that Palantir creates. So let's say that now that they have a new the DVE designation and they want to change the algorithm to better suit that kind of idea, well, you're going to have these the predictive policing systems are going to be popping out new predictions that they weren't making before. And she just said in the press briefing earlier that they were going to be working with non-governmental organizations to get this whole thing going. There's no way Palantir is not one of them, being in charge of all the fusion centers in all the major cities of the country. Now, the reason why I don't like Palantir, the reason why predictive programming is bad, I know it sounds crazy that I have to say that like that, but it goes back to something that I've talked about a lot of times on my channel, and it's called parallel construction. Parallel construction is where law enforcement officials, or anybody else, any bad actor to be honest, finds out some information about you that they really shouldn't know. So they illegally wiretap you, or they beat the heck out of somebody who finally tells them information about you, or they come across it in the course of a bad investigation that isn't legal. So they know you did something illegal, but they can't prove it in a court of law because they can't bring the information into the court on how they know that about you. And so the police invented this awesome thing called parallel construction, where you use the information you obtained illegally to create a legal showing of how you got to the idea that this person committed a crime. It's called parallel construction. And I have a feeling you're going to see a lot of this in the future, because it's worth saying that whenever we see an FF event or a really bad event that happens and it's on the news media, is it not a little bit weird that 8 times out of 10 it turns out that there's been FBI informants in contact with the guy leading up to it? I mean, this goes from all the way from school shootings to the first World Trade Center bombing, at the church shooting in Texas. It turns out there's an FBI agent that's been working with this guy for years, months leading up to the bad, horrible incident that happened. That's parallel construction, my friends. That's what they accuse the government of doing and using the hammer for as well. Side note. Minority Report was a warning. You could call it a warning. You could call it predictive programming. And I wonder what that means about the people that they have in that tub. Who are those people? So parallel construction is the danger to me, and it can be completely changed. US, UK intel agencies declare cyber war on independent media, right? But this is on November 24th of 2020. This has already started. And I know a lot of people that watch my channel don't like to hear it, but Trump did nothing to prevent this. Nothing. So the thing is, I don't like how people always put everything on Trump, but now this is definitely time for us to do something about this. We can't allow people to be digitally deleted and then just move on with our lives and not say anything about it, because it's really a digital version of what happened in our analog history. And just because it's digital doesn't make it any better or worse. You shouldn't be able to deperson people. Wanted to show you guys this. Joe Biden will keep Christopher Wray on as the FBI director. Guess that's enough said about that, though, right? I wanted to look at his all important executive orders. Of course, there were 17 of them, but I wanted to go through just a couple of them. Number one, on the pandemic, he's basically not changing anything. He's doing a lot of complaining, and he's doing a national mask mandate that isn't really a national mask mandate. He basically just said there's going to be a lot more people that die. Okay. Excuse me. Then he's done his executive order on the changes that Trump had made to the immigration system. So the first thing that he's done is he's completely reversed Trump's ability, that the ability that Trump fought for to store people in other countries who were going to court instead of doing catch and release. Catch and release has now been immediately reinstated, and in case you didn't know how serious that was,
and it is foundational. Sex differences are not just something that we made up at one point. They are the building blocks of human civilization, but also the source of so much delight and mystery and beauty.
Well, that's a little off topic.
Make life worth living, actually, in a lot of ways. Destroy those and we lose a lot, maybe everything.
He's not wrong.
Well, we've got some exclusive reporting for you tonight. In Joe Biden's first day in office, the Department of Homeland Security issued a sweeping directive calling for a 100-day pause on deportations. We reported that last night. We now have an internal email sent yesterday to ICE officers in Texas that shows how this order was enacted. And we're quoting, "As of midnight tonight, stop all removals. This includes Mexican bus runs, charter flights, and commercial removals until further notice. All cases are to be considered no significant likelihood of removal in foreseeable future." In other words, stop sending people here illegally back to the country of origin. The official goes on to say this, and we're quoting, "Release them all immediately. No sponsor available is not acceptable any longer." The official notes in the email that he is just, quote, the messenger explaining the directive. It wasn't his idea, it was Joe Biden's. Now, this email was news to us. Friday's memorandum from the Biden administration to halt deportations did not call for people here illegally to be released from detention. We made some calls today and we learned that Homeland Security is currently hammering out how to enact the memorandum. It does not specifically call for the instant release of all migrants in detention. So what was this memo about? Just the result of the complete chaos that resulted when the incoming administration on its first day changed a policy this big without explaining what it means. Chaos. We thought the last administration had a monopoly on that. Apparently not.
No, they're all chaotic, Tucker. Shut up. So, and in the course of what we're talking about right now, the next thing up is the Honduran migrant caravan that's on its way up here. And why wouldn't there be a migrant caravan on its way up here? Of course, what we need to show now to, what the corporate media needs to show now to the people is a juxtaposition of how horrible this situation was handled when President Trump was in office, and then how wonderful and amazingly this will be handled now that Biden is president. You're going to get these two juxtapositions on just about every topic, but you can't have that with a migrant caravan unless you got a migrant caravan coming on up. So I would assume the same people who told those people to pack the first time told them to pack again, and this time, hey. The other thing that he did is on his executive orders was he entered us back into the Paris Climate Agreement. You guys, the Paris Climate Agreement is so annoying. If you look into the research, it's not going to lower, it's not even going to do what they say it's going to do. It essentially is just going to take a bunch of money from first world countries and siphon it off to countries that don't get the same rules imposed on them because of the Paris Climate Accord. The funny thing about that is that this is December 10, 2020. While we had already been pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, the UN says America is already cutting so much carbon, it doesn't need the Paris Climate Accord. Well, I really appreciate that, the UN, but they don't put us in the climate accord to help us cut our carbon. They're putting us in the climate accord to take our nation's treasure. So they're missing the point there. And people make fun of me, my friends make fun of me all the time because I'm always talking about gas prices. I'm always like, yeah, well, if you think everybody's the same, just wait until you get your gas prices in the next few months. And I'm always kind of jesting when I do that. It's a joke. But at the same time, it's a very serious matter, because when Trump pulled us out of the climate accord, this was around the time that the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests in France, were rioting and basically losing their minds. So let's take a quick look back at why exactly that all started.
Is now known to have died amid days of mass protests in France. The anger was caused by rising fuel prices, spurred by President Macron.
Oh, come on.
I switched from State Farm
Sorry, guys.
because of this site. They had me paying $163 a month.
Macron's carbon tax hikes. Demonstrators set toll booths on fire on a highway in the southeast on Tuesday night. Elsewhere, refineries, key roads, all blocked, causing major disruption. Over 250,000 people joined the so-called Yellow Vest protest, named after the high visibility jackets which motorists have to carry in their vehicles. Well, the demonstrations have now spread nationwide. Over 500 people have been injured, including dozens of police officers. Our France correspondent Charlotte Dubinsky takes a closer look at what the protesters are doing.
I'm here just on the outskirts of Rouen, where, as you can see behind me, there are a group of around 100 yellow vest wearers. These are the Gilets jaunes. They've come out to protest against the high tax on carbonants, on fuels here in France, which have increased by more than 20% in the last year. If you just take a look, you'll see
20% in the last year, okay? This is what would have happened similarly to our fuel prices had he not pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. This is coming.
that there's another group over here, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to blockade roads and roundabouts like this. This is one of the main arteries that would go from Rouen all the way to Paris, and as you can see, they've brought some of the traffic to a relative crawl. Some people have described it as Operation Escargot. The idea is bringing the traffic to a standstill or a crawl, but not actually completely blocking the roads. One of the reasons that they've changed their tack on that, when these protests started back on Saturday 4 days ago, they were actually trying to block the roads, but that's caused them problems with the police. So the idea here...
So the entire Gilets jaunes movement, the entire Yellow Vest movement, we'll say the establishment narrative was that it was all because of gas prices. Now, some people who you would talk to in the Yellow Vest movement would also say that a large part of the protest was also the refugee crisis that they were having there at the same time. But isn't that interesting? We now have 11 million undocumented immigrants that are about to get their citizenship, and we have a migrant caravan getting ready to push its way across our border, and we've had all of the protections that the Trump administration put in removed. And so we're going to have kind of the same exact situation here. Migrants and higher fuel prices. I hope it certainly doesn't go the way of the Gilets jaunes, but I think it's kind of not that long ago, so it might be history worth looking at. Just a thought. Twitter refused to remove CP because it didn't violate its policies, says a lawsuit. And this is a just infuriating read. It's an infuriating read. It makes me happy that Twitter has now made it to the rock bottom of the S&P 500. Why? Because they banned Trump. So we'll see how this plays out in the future. But I'm going to show you something that's very interesting. When Twitter banned the president, Poland made it illegal officially for people to be banned just by social media. Lavrov from the EU made a public statement saying that the banning of Donald Trump was highly concerning. It is no longer acceptable for platforms to take key decisions alone, said an EU commission. France, Germany, Mexico, Australia all join international outcry over censorship of Donald Trump. Yeah, man, Poland is based as hell. Yes, they are. So you have, and then even here, even Merkel, Merkel hated Trump, but even Merkel had to take the time to say that the banning of Donald Trump's Twitter account is highly problematic. And so what they're acting like in the United States press is like, this is no big deal. No big deal, right? We're banning the president, but it's no big deal. But it is a big deal. If you look at just the international outcry, you can tell that they're scared. And who is scared? The ruling elite is scared because they just saw Trump deplatformed over this. Of course that's going to scare them. Now all of a sudden the technocrats have too much power, and that's what they're talking about too, is the technocrats having too much power. Isn't that interesting? Staying in line with the technocrats. Oh, I thought this is an amazing story. Google says it will pull its search engine from Australia if it is forced to pay news publishers to host their content. So Australia and Google are really going at it right now. And of course, Google's not going to pull their search engine, but the government of Australia, of course, does not respond well to threats from Google. And so I'm going to be very interested to see how this plays out. I like to see any government standing up to Google at all, even though you don't see it very often. At the same time that Australia is stepping up to them, Governor DeSantis of Florida, this guy, man, he keeps making a lot of the right moves when it comes to the CV. And now this, Florida governor makes moves to divest state funds from Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Twitter. This kind of stuff needs to happen. It may not be the right way to do it, but people have to start doing something. If they're not going to address it, I have a lot of respect for this governor for at least trying to do something within his power to curtail the censorship that's happening right now, and the fact that we are getting ready to basically be living in a fascistic technocracy. Right? Because when corporations are working in concert with the government to suppress the people, that's fascism, right? But, you know, Biden's president, so we're going to see stuff like this. CV cases fall in 46 states, but Biden warns of more death. Well, isn't that good news? That happened to just come out on January 21st, 2021. And I just wanted to play this, guys, with you finally because I thought it was very interesting. This is Burke's account of what was going on in the background when Donald Trump was trying to respond to the CV. I found it interesting.
It took a while after I arrived in the White House to remove all of the ancillary data that was coming in. I mean, there was parallel data streams coming into the White House that were not transparently utilized.
Parallel data streams. So, two official data streams that had different information about the CV were coming into the White House.
Needed to stop that. Where people
You mean outside advisors?
Outside advisors coming to inside advisors, and to this day, I mean, till the day I left, I'm convinced there were parallel data streams because
disinformation.
I saw the president presenting graphs that I never made. So I know that someone out there or someone inside was creating a parallel set of data and graphics that were
a parallel platform
to the president. I know what I sent up, and I know that what was in his hands was different from that. You can't do that. You have to use the entire database. To this day, I don't know. I know now, watching some of the tapes, that certainly Scott Atlas brought in parallel data streams.
So the chief of staff is not saying, wait a second, this is our official coordinator. Listen to her and her only. Listen to you? No one was saying that.
No one said that to me.
To the president.
I don't know if they were saying it to the president.
Ouch. So that's it, guys. Just wanted to I wanted to go over this one more time because it's important what's getting ready to happen. We're getting ready to have the entirety of the intelligence infrastructure is going to be brought down to bear on DVEs, or domestic violence extremists, and they're going to be working with non-governmental organizations to determine what makes a DVE, because I've noticed that there are certain aspects of society that are being highly demonized right now that really don't have a lot of violence or terrorism in their arena. So it's basically a bunch of talk. So what is going to make it an arrestable offense? And I really worry about that. That if they're going to be just trolling social media and looking at people's comments and the way that they act on social media and using that to go and knock on people's doors, it's going to be a problem. And of course, you know, folks like me and others who are unafraid to speak their truth are going to be on the lists first. So goody, let's get ready for that. Anybody got any questions or anything before I jump off of here? Go through some of these comments, make sure there's nothing I missed. Yeah, Giza said asymmetric 5th generation cyber warfare against citizens and political warfare by communist insurrectionists of Trader Joe's. Of Trader Joe. I have a question. Have you guys heard about this recently? Since the whole Anon thing kind of fell through, and there's a lot of people kind of walking around kind of trying to figure out, like, kind of like I got donked in the head with birds spinning around trying to figure out, you know, what to do or where to go next. Have you guys heard about Operation Trust and Anatoly Golitsyn? Have you heard anybody in the alternative media talking about Operation Trust or Golitsyn? I'm curious because, yeah, I know they are already showing up at people's places. It's not just Dallas. It's not just Dallas, but I noticed something very strange that jumped into the alternative media's meme, and it was right around the time that the whole Anon thing is just, you know, falling apart. Anomaly, David Icke, and Alex Jones all came out with, at the same time, on the same day, a story about Operation Trust, which was a subversive Soviet program that they're comparing to the QLARP. And I was going to cover it, and I thought it was important, but the thing that struck me as kind of odd is that it all seemed coordinated. Like, did all three of them find that article or find that information and decide to release it on the 22nd separately? Or is there some kind of coordination going on there? I thought that was highly irregular. Okay, well, if you haven't heard of it, we'll go through it real quick. So, this guy Golitsyn, he was a KGB defector. You could call him the lesser known, because everybody knows of Bezmenov, Yuri Bezmenov. And this guy's whole shtick was that the collapse of the Soviet Union was actually not the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that they had faked it in order to lull the West into a weak point in more of an asymmetric type of warfare. And it was based around propaganda, and it was based around convincing the West that communism was about to fall on its own, and we should just leave it alone and not do anything to upset the apple cart. If you guys want to learn a little bit about it, I can play. This is an interview. This guy, first of all, this man that has this YouTube channel, Matthew North, he's passed, unfortunately, but he is an excellent YouTuber. I recommend you subscribe this channel, and you'll have information that you could go there and learn, even though he's passed and he hasn't made posts in a long time. He's got a lot of great content here. But this is the guy that covered Golitsyn when he brought him his notes from before he defected.
Golitsyn taught and revealed was that all Soviet governments are Leninist governments. They're driven by the deception strategy perfected by Lenin. which is aimed at achieving a long-range strategy, namely control of the whole world.
And part of this strategy, as really put into a codified plan by 1959, dealt with creating the impression that liberalization or destabilization, decentralization was occurring in the communist states as a way of lulling the West into putting down its defenses.
Yeah. What happened was that, according to Galitzin...
So you can already see the comparison between the Anon movement and what they're talking about here.
...is that after the death of Stalin, the communists realized, in general, that the method of control that they'd been adopting, namely brutal repression, was an inefficient method of achieving control over populations, and that it was more efficient to seek to achieve control through infiltration and deception and through the control of the minds of the target. And so the party instructed Alexander Shelepin, who was the head of the KGB, in 1958 to develop a plan for the use of the total resources of the revolution. And the KGB and the GRU, military intelligence, were instructed to become the instruments of the mobilization of the resources of the revolution. So between 1959 and 1961, Shelepin developed, perfected, and agreed with the party the full outline of this deception plan. And the deception plan is basically a means of projecting communism into the whole of the rest of the world. And they do it through deception, and we can examine how this is done as we go on.
Well, one of the features of the plan, obviously, was to give the impression that the international communist movement was breaking up, that there were splits, divisions, dissent, that there was a rift between Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union, there was a rift between Red China and the Soviet Union. All of these things were examples of this disinformation strategy. And one of the principal goals of it would be that the West would feel more secure and put down its guard.
Yes. Lenin's methodology involves the use of the dialectic. Now, the Western mind, which is a civilized, developed mind, does not understand dialectical deception, which is basically a Mongol concept. And the fake Russia-China split is a good example. By creating the false impression that there was a split, which incidentally they've continued ever since, because now we have communist China and supposedly non-communist Russia, so the illusion of the split continues. Right. The West...
And this is clutch, because the politicians of our time, they all went off of that idea. We need to finance China, bring them into the fold, give them International Monetary Fund money, make them as westernized as we can, and so that we can separate them from Russia. And then this guy's pointing out that the breakup between communist Russia or communist China and the USSR never happened. That the Berlin Wall essentially was a psychological operation.
Lulled into believing that if it supported China, it would be taking precautionary action against Russia. Yes. In fact, what's happening, and is continuing, they are both working together. Yes. And their intentions ultimately are hostile. They are aggressively oriented towards the West.
Yes, and another consequence of deliberately staging phony encouragement of, or setting up, let's say, the KGB setting up phony dissident movements within communist countries, and supposedly, or in a theatrical way, presenting what appears to be liberalization or some lessening of tight control. That also has the effect of lulling the genuine underground opposition to communism in these countries out in the open, giving them the false hope that they can speak out, and then further identifying them.
So these are the ideas that Galitzin had. Now, this is Galitzin's book, and it's on page 13 that he talks about, or he starts to talk about Operation Trust. And before we do that, what do you all think about the USA Corporation being dissolved? Well, I would love for that to happen. I remember the first time I came across the straw man information, I think I was probably in my early teens. The whole maritime law dig and all of that, that would be mad cool. But do I think that it's going to happen right now and that Trump is going to be president March 3rd? No, I don't. Sorry. But hey, could be. I've been wrong many times in my life. Yeah, I mean, of course, I would love to dissolve it. Of course, I mean that's the insidious thing about this whole situation is we all want to dissolve the corporation in the United States and bring back a democratic republic because we all know we're operating in an unconstitutional government. But the question is how do we get there? And so far, what we've been trying hasn't been working, right? So back to Operation Trust. The Soviet Security Service was reorganized, renamed the OGPU, and given new political tasks. It was directed to mount disinformation and political operations. False opposition movements were set up and controlled secretly by the OGPU. They were designed to attract to their ranks genuine opponents of the regime inside and outside the country. These innocent persons could then be used by the regime in various ways. They could act as channels for disinformation. They could be blackmailed and recruited as agents. They could be arrested and given public trials. A characteristic but not unique example of this technique is provided by the so-called trust operation. In 1921, the NEP, which is the new economic policy, which is this front that was supposed to make the Soviet Union look like it was becoming more capitalistic, was launched. The OGPU created inside Soviet Russia a false anti-Soviet organization, the Monarchist Alliance of Central Russia. It had once been a genuine organization funded by the Tsar's generals in Moscow and Leningrad, but liquidated by the Soviet Security Service in 1919-1920. So basically what they did was they got all these, because remember the Soviet Revolution was again a king. So they wanted to, the people who were in opposition to the communist movement and the communist revolt, they were wanting to reinstall the king. And so what the OGPU did was they recruited people who had been known to be anti-communist, subversive, people who were part of the underground. They recruited them into this, what we would call a honeypot now, or a limited hangout. And it had, very interestingly, some very popular and well-named Russian generals of the time that basically were able to convince most of the opposition inside the Soviet Union and therefore the intelligence agencies that they were talking to of a certain perception of the Soviet Union, that it was collapsing, that it was falling apart, there was no reason to interfere with it. And because they were able to convince the dissidents inside of the Soviet Union that that was the perception, those dissidents then went and reported to foreign intelligence agencies that same perception, and it ended up being an incorrect perception. And that was all done based off of Operation Trust. And so, like I said, over the past few days, you've had Alex Jones, David Icke, Anomaly, and various other conservative commentators talking about Operation Trust and Glitzen and comparing it to the Anon movement. And I don't want to make a call one way or the other on it, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of it and to know that that's something that is a confirmed subversive Soviet tactic that's been around for a very long time. The idea that the Anon movement could have been a honeypot or could have been a limited hangout is an old idea. People like myself who were around when that first happened, I came across him when I was doing separate research into Vegas in 2017, and I would say the majority of the people who were following the movement back then when I was, we all left when the strange movement from 4chan to 8chan happened. That was it for us. I was there for FBI, Anon, and all the other precursors to what happened on the boards then. And so when the shady move from 4chan to 8chan happened, most of the critical thinkers I knew, most of the guys that were following it I knew, kind of fell off of it. Now, did that mean that I stopped paying attention to it? No. I watch CNN. That's not very smart either, right? You could call CNN a limited hangout where maybe it's 50% true and 50% false. I think it actually has a worse ratio than the boards, but whatever. So, you know, any media outlet is a limited hangout now. You're not going to get the full truth from anywhere. So what I used it as was a very small piece of a mosaic of information. So when I looked at all of my different sources and I could find a common thread, then that would be something that I would look into. But as far as following the Anon, I really couldn't understand it after the move to 8chan, because if you were there when that happened, that was definitely some shady stuff, and that's when I stopped following the Anon, if I ever did. It was mostly just fun trying to disprove people, and I have to say, he is the longest one to ever LARP on the boards, and he's not been exposed as far as I know. We've talked about Defango and the various other guys who were connected to it at the beginning when it was Cicada 3301 and how it mutated from that. But point being, it's quite possible it was a limited hangout. It's quite possible that it was a honey trap. And it is concerning that you hear the press secretary for Biden saying what she's saying about DVEs, since they've already put through legislation declaring the Anon movement a domestic terrorist organization. So it is worrying, and people should be worried about it. The question is what are we going to do about it? Because free speech is free speech, and as long as we're just speaking, you know, what's going on here? I logged into my Twitter account yesterday. They permanently banned me there. I don't even use that. It's crazy. The market has to crash it. Yeah, well, not much longer now. Yes, Glenn, I call it game jacking. Like, they game jacked that movement, I think, right when they moved it to Akun. And then from that point on, it was subversive. And, you know, they say limited hangout has a lot of truth in there. And there is a lot of truth in there. But the problem is they use the 20% of disinformation to really lead people astray. And it can cause people who are looking for the truth to get seriously set back whenever they get lost into one of these traps. But it's not the end of the world. And to be honest with you, if you're getting your information just from that, I would say that's probably better information than getting your information just from CNN. Neither one of them are good. The idea is, like I said, we want to use a mosaic of information. We don't want to trust any one source. We want to look for confirmation from multiple sources about anything. But you're right. I believe the Q thing started out as a good thing and ended as a very bad thing. I'm looking for a plan. Yes, I'm looking for a plan. See, that's the whole problem. We need to stop looking for a plan or trusting a plan, and we need to start making a plan. That's the thing. It's not about anybody. Nobody is going to come to our rescue, guys. I hate to tell you, nobody's going to come to our rescue. There are no white hats on white horses that are going to roll in and roll everybody up for us and be like, here is your republic back the way it was. No, just like any kind of change that you want to put forth into the reality, it starts with yourself. It starts with us. We have to take accountability for our own actions. We have to take accountability for the position that we've allowed our government to get to, and we have to make the change. There's not anybody that's going to do it for us. I hate to tell you guys that, but I think most of the people who watch my channel know that very well. So hopefully we can start making some plans instead of following them and looking for them. Yeah, man. All right, comment, Luna Tuna, Glenn, Sherry, everybody. Thank you so much for diving into my 20-person live streams. I guess you could call those limited hangouts, but not for the reason that the intelligence community does, just because they're limited. Anyways, I love you guys. I will live stream probably again on Wednesday. I'm thinking maybe like a live stream system of Wednesday and Sunday, and that sometimes in those live streams I might be going over some stuff that I had made in videos throughout the previous weeks, just so that we could talk about it, because I enjoy more than anything, I enjoy talking to you guys. Like, this is so much better for me than making videos, because you guys give me input. You guys can take me off in another direction, and you guys can get me to present information I didn't even know I was going to present. So I appreciate all y'all's feedback. You guys are the best subscribers. I'm not even kidding. You guys are awesome. You give me a reason to do this every day. And I'm not going to get too mushy on it, so that's it. Love y'all. Talk to you soon. Peace.